Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Assembly Committee on Natural Resources. Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Assemblywoman Anderson?
Present.
Assemblywoman Black?
Here.
Assemblywoman Brown May?
Here.
Assemblywoman Carlton?
Here.
Assemblywoman Cohen?
Here.
Assemblyman Ellison?
Present.
Assemblywoman Gonzalez?
Here.
Assemblywoman Hanson?
Here.
Assemblywoman Martinez?
Present.
Assemblywoman Titus?
Here.
Assemblywoman Wheeler?
E.
Chair Watts?
Here. Thank you. We have all members present. We have a quorum. Before we get started, I'll go through a couple of quick housekeeping announcements as we usually do. Members, please remember to mute yourselves when you are not speaking so we can minimize background noise. Members of the public may provide testimony and participate in a number of ways. Information on how to do so can be found on every agenda for our meetings, as well as the help page at the Nevada Legislature's website. You can find a link to the help page in a header at the top of every page at our website. To provide testimony or public comment, participants must sign up in advance where you'll receive the information to call in. Written comments can also be emailed to our committee email address before, during, or up to 48 hours after the meeting. You can find that email again on our committee page on the website or our meeting agendas. Committee exhibits or amendments must be submitted electronically as a PDF to our committee manager no later than 4 p.m. on the business day prior to the meeting. Amendments must include bill number, a statement of intent, and contact information. All submitted exhibits can be found on the legislature's website. When we do get to testimony and public comments, we ask that they be kept to 2 minutes so that we can accommodate all speakers and get through our agenda in a timely manner. And we are going to have some committee action. So again, just a reminder for folks to please provide their name when making a motion or second, and to say yes or no when we take a vote. With that, we'll move on. We're going to start with our work session today. We have 2 bills on our work session, and with that, we may call upon sponsors or presenters to clarify any questions that may arise. But we'll go ahead and get started with Assembly Bill 171. Mr. Stinisbeck, our policy analyst, will walk us through the work session document. Please go ahead whenever you are ready, sir.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Jan Stinisbeck with the Research Division. Assembly Bill 171 was heard in this committee on March 15th, and it declares that it's the policy of the state of Nevada to protect the Spring Valley population of Rocky Mountain junipers, known as swamp cedars, that occur in White Pine County within the Basawabi traditional culture property. The bill makes it unlawful for any swamp cedar within that property to be willfully or negligently cut, destroyed, mutilated, or removed without first obtaining a special permit from the state forester fire warden. And there is one amendment, Assemblyman Watts proposed this amendment, which makes the following change. It provides that Indian tribes are exempt from the provision of the bill, whether the Indian tribe is native to Nevada or not. And the amendment is attached as well to the work session document. With that, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Stinisbeck. Are there any questions?
I have a question, Chair.
Vice Chair Cohen, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm sorry, this just occurred to me and I didn't think of this before when I was reading this. Okay, so the exception now for Native Americans, is that we're saying that's for any members of any tribes? It doesn't have to be a group organization, you know what I mean? It doesn't have to be a tribal event for the exception to apply?
Thank you for that question. And for the record, this is Howard Watts. So the original exemption had language that had the word native in it, which there was concern that that language could exclude members of Indian tribes, Native American tribes that reside outside the state. We have several tribes whose lands occupy multiple states. So the intent of the amendment was to clarify that, and we also have large traditional tribes that are now exist in multiple tribal governments. So the purpose was to clarify that anyone who comes here to practice their ceremonies or to gather food or medicine is covered by the existing exemption that is under statute.
Okay, thank you for that. So if it's an individual person, they have to be gathering food, doing something, gathering the food, gather articles for food, medicinal or ceremonial use. It can't just be, I want to hang out.
That is correct. Yes.
All right, thank you for that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to amend and do pass Assembly Bill 171.
Move to amend and do pass, and this is Cohen.
Thank you. I've got a motion from Vice Chair Cohen. Do I have a second?
Second, Brown May.
Thank you. I've got a second from Assemblywoman Brown May. Is there any discussion on the motion?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Assemblywoman Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will support this measure out of committee, but may reserve my right to change my vote on the floor.
Thank you for that. And of course, members are not bound, but I do ask that if you intend to change your vote between committee and the floor, that you let me know. Thank you. Any other discussion on the motion? Hearing none, will the secretary please conduct a roll call vote?
Assemblywoman Anderson,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Black,
No.
Assemblywoman Brown May,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Carlton,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Cohen,
Yes.
Assemblyman Ellison,
No.
Assemblywoman Gonzalez,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Hanson,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Martinez,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Titus,
Yes.
Assemblyman Wheeler,
No.
Chair Watts.
Yes. Thank you very much. That motion carries, and I will assign myself the floor statement for Assembly Bill 171. With that, we'll move on to the other item on our work session today, which is Assembly Joint Resolution number 4. Mr. Stinisbeck, will you please lead us through the work session document?
Thank you, Chair Watts. For the record, Jan Stinsbeck for the Research Division of the LCB. The next measure on work session today is Assembly Joint Resolution 4. It's heard in committee on March 15th, and it urges certain land in Spring Valley to be designated as a National Heritage Area. Again, there was one amendment proposed to the measure by Assemblyman Watts, and it makes the following changes. It revises the whereas clauses in order to provide language that reflect the experience of the Indian tribes in this area, including language that discusses the spiritual beliefs of this tribe, of the tribes, and the massacres that occurred in this area. Lastly, the proposed amendment also urges the U.S. Congress to take action to further protect certain lands in the Spring Valley area, including possible designation as a national monument or expansion of Great Basin National Park. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Stinisbeck. Are there any questions or discussion? Seeing none, I'd accept a motion to amend and do pass AJR 4.
Move to amend and do pass. This is Cohen.
Thank you very
I
much.
second.
I've got a motion from Vice Chair Cohen and a second from Assemblywoman Gonzalez. Is there any discussion on the motion?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Assemblywoman Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I stated previously, and I'm going to state again, that I'm going to support this out of committee, but reserve my right to change on the floor.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the motion? Hearing none, will the secretary please conduct a roll call vote?
Assemblywoman Anderson,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Black,
No.
Assemblywoman Brown May,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Carlton,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Cohen,
Yes.
Assemblyman Ellison,
No.
Assemblywoman Gonzalez,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Hanson,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Martinez,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Titus,
Yes.
Assemblyman Wheeler,
No.
Chair Watts.
I'm a yes. Thank you very much. That motion carries, and I will take the floor statement on AJR 4 as well. Thank you very much, members. That concludes our work session. With that, we'll move on to our bill hearings for the day, and I'm going to start with Assembly Bill 275. So I'll open the hearing on Assembly Bill 275, which establishes provisions relating to the use of pesticides containing certain chemicals. Welcome Assemblywoman Gorlow to the Committee on Natural Resources. You may proceed with your presentation whenever you are ready.
Thank you and good afternoon, Chair Watts and members of the committee. For the record, I am Michelle Gorlow, representing Assembly District 35 in Clark County. I am pleased to present Assembly Bill 275, which establishes neonicotinoid pesticides, also known as Neonics for short, as restricted use pesticides in the state. Before reviewing the bill and conceptual amendment, which should have been delivered to your offices this morning, I'd like to begin by explaining the origins of neonic pesticides and how they've come to undermine important pollinator populations. Neonicotinoid pesticides first emerged in the 1990s as a safe and environmentally friendly alternative to more traditional insecticides. Neonic manufacturers praised and marketed its non-toxicity for mammals and vertebrates, its water solubility, and selectivity for certain insects. The market for neonic pesticides exploded after farmers and consumers alike made the switch, which is why neonicotinoids gross billions of dollars annually. Today, neonics are ubiquitous. In Nevada, there are more than 650 registered neonicotinoid-containing pesticides in the marketplace. However, our collective reliance on these chemicals in farming, gardening, and pest management has created a serious problem that researchers and regulators never anticipated. One 2019 study published in the Public Library of Science estimates that America's agricultural landscape has become 48 times more toxic to pollinators like honeybees in the last 25 years, due mostly exclusively to the presence of neonicotinoid insecticides. The problem with neonics is that they are systemic. They dissolve in water, so plants absorb the toxins into their tissues. When bees and other pollinators, like butterflies, encounter these neonic-treated plants, it can be devastating. At toxic levels, neonics kill bees, and even with sublethal amounts, the negative outcomes are lasting. Cornell University's Pollinator Network has compiled a list of studies documenting the effects of neonics on bees. Research has shown that exposure to neonics alters memory and learning, impairs navigation and locomotion skills, weakens immunity, and reduces food consumption, reproduction, and forage rates. Specific neonic chemicals have also been shown to pose even more serious threats to pollinator health. Imidacloprid, which is the most widely used pesticide in the world, has been linked to colony collapse disorder by researchers at the Harvard School of Public Health. Their study suggests that low-dose exposures to neonics can trigger a biological reaction in bees more fatal than compromised immunity, as other studies have demonstrated. The threats neonics pose to pollinator health are well-founded, which is why governments have already taken action to limit neonicotinoid use. In 2018, the European Union banned outdoor use of neonics, and already 4 states have made neonics restricted use. There are also 5 other states with neonicotinoid legislation this session. AB 275 is a small contribution towards curbing neonicotinoid use. In essence, it would remove neonic pesticides from consumer shelves, but allow professional farmers and gardeners to continue using. And here's how it works. The Nevada Pesticide Act grants the director of the Department of Agriculture the power to classify certain harmful or toxic pesticides as restricted use. Section 3 of the bill would amend the statute defining restricted use pesticide by creating a new subsection that includes neonicotinoid pesticides in the definition. Section 1 of the bill articulates what is meant by neonicotinoid pesticides to include all the existing active ingredient neonic chemicals and any future chemical the director assigns to the neonicotinoid class. The proposed amendment slightly alters this definition by excluding certain consumer products, wood preservation, and pest control activities from the definition. I've elected to do so because research has shown that these products and services pose a negligible risk to pollinators. Section 2 of the bill makes a conforming change to place the definition of neonicotinoids into NRS, and Section 4 formally authorizes the Director of Agriculture to designate any chemical not included in the definition as a part of the neonic class. Section 5 adds a new definition of restricted use pesticide to NRS 586.206, which establishes the rules for selling restricted use pesticides in the state. According to the statute, restricted use pesticide retailers register with the department annually, maintain at least 2 years of records, and submit a monthly report detailing sales. Under law, the director can also limit the time, conditions, and location where restricted use pesticides may be applied. Section 6 would create a location-based regulation that bans neonicotinoid pesticide application on state lands. Section 7 defines neonics again for the purpose of custom application of restricted use pesticides. Section 8 places the definition in NRS, and Section 9 allows neonics to be considered restricted use pesticides for custom applications. Section 10 establishes that only certified applicators can purchase and use restricted use pesticides and makes it illegal for a person to apply neonics on state land. Finally, Section 11 sets the effective date for the bill as January 1st, 2022. As written, AB 275 will require a 2/3 vote because the Department of Agriculture issues fees to administer the restricted use pesticide program. For the committee's edification, restricted use retailers pay a flat fee of $25 annually to register with the Department of Agriculture. The department also oversees certification for farmers and applicators through an exam that costs $50. NDA also provides info on free training workshops and self-study guides. Passage guarantees 4 years of certification, so the annual expense to applicators is only $12.50. This modest fee ensures that the department can operate and regulate restricted use pesticides without additional money from the state's general fund. We do not anticipate this bill to have any meaningful financial impact on retailers or farmers because for the most part, they already are registered or certified. By classifying neonics as restricted use, we ensure that only qualified and trained applicators have access and save our pollinator population from unintentional overuse. I'd like to now turn it over to Matthew Forrester. He is a Trevor J. McMinn Endowed Professor in Biology at the University of Nevada, Reno. He will talk a little bit more about our declining insect populations in Nevada. And after that, we have Malia Libby, Conservation Associate at Environment America, who will discuss some other ecological ramifications of neonic pesticides. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks. I'm happy to have a chance to talk to you all. So I am an insect ecologist in the biology department at UNR, and I have 3 points I'd like to make briefly that I hope are relevant to this bill. So first, pollinators are declining in the Western US, specifically in the Western US, and possibly more severely than in the rest of the country. In my lab, we study historical records from Nevada and from across the region, and we have estimated a rate of decline of 1.6% fewer butterflies per year. So that's a compounding annual startling loss. Butterflies are important pollinators and food for other organisms. Having fewer butterflies represents a loss of ecosystem function and value for human society. We don't have the same historical data on other insects like wild bees, but we have good reason to believe they are declining at a similar rate. And it's interesting to note that the rate of decline that I'm talking about is consistent with observations reported from the general public, the so-called windshield effect. People observe fewer insects smashed on their windshields, and that's because they're declining. So second, based on analyses of climate, land use, and historical records, the causes of these declines are well understood. They are habitat loss, climate change, and pesticides, including neonics, as well as other kinds of habitat degradation. In Nevada, and I talked to the public a fair bit about that, I find that there's a tendency for Nevadans to assume that we have so much open land in our state that we don't need to worry about pesticides on lands that are close to home in our yards or in city parks, for example. But that's not the right way to think about the problem. We now know, and this is actually results of fairly recent research, we now know that climate change is severely impacting insects out in the open spaces of our state. That raises the stakes for careful management of the lands that we have close at hand. In other words, in our yards and other areas that we can control. Third, and very briefly, smart pesticide regulation in towns and cities, in my opinion, is important for farmers. Agriculture needs a diversity of insects for pollination, for pest control, and other services. So I think it's fair to say that pesticide control is an issue. It's an issue of food security and job security for rural areas, as well as an issue of quality of life for all Nevadans. We all need butterflies as well as other insects. And I'd be happy to take questions on insects of Nevada. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. If we could go to Malia Libby, and then we can take questions, if that is okay with you.
Yes, that sounds good. Thank you very much, Assemblywoman. And Ms. Libby, you may proceed whenever you're ready.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Malia Libby, and I'm here with Environment Nevada. We advocate for policies that protect clean air, clean water, and open spaces for all Nevadans. I want to thank the Assembly Committee on Natural Resources for hosting this hearing and Assemblywoman Gorlow for leading this effort to protect our environment and communities from the neonicotinoid class of insecticides. I want to urge the committee to move forward with this bill to classify neonicotinoids as restricted use pesticides. As you have heard, neonics have dire impacts on pollinators in the state. And unfortunately, the impacts on the environment go much further than this. The nature of these pesticides to dissolve in water means that the pesticides can travel far beyond where they were initially applied. Neonics are carried into soil and groundwater, areas where the pesticide can persist for years before being broken down or coming into contact with wildlife. In a 2015 study by the U.S. Geological Survey, neonicotinoids were detected in half of all streams sampled across the United States and Puerto Rico. The neonicotinoids detected most frequently was imidacloprid, and it was notably associated with use in urban settings. In these urban settings, neonics were detected year-round, rather than seasonally as typical of agricultural streams. Wildlife from butterflies and other valuable pollinators to predatory insects that keep pests in check are impacted by neonics. The widespread detection of neonics in waterways is particularly concerning for invertebrates in aquatic habitats and the birds, fish, and amphibians that rely on these invertebrates for food. Additionally, people are unwittingly exposed to neonics through tap water. University of Iowa researchers detected neonics in already treated tap water. These researchers have found that common water treatment methods, such as chlorination, can make neonics even more dangerous by causing them to react and form more toxic substances. One byproduct of imidacloprid from this kind of process is over 300 times more toxic to mammals. These substances could have serious consequences, whether it is ingested or inevitably released back into the environment. 4 states have already achieved restricting the use of neonics in retail sales, and with this bill, Nevada is poised to join them and protect a diverse set of species, from bees and birds, and also our own health while doing so. In my final remarks, I want to emphasize how important this change would be for Nevada. with these pesticides remaining in the environment long after they have been put there. The sooner we end uses of neonics, the sooner we will see our environment put back in balance. Thank you again for considering this important step in protecting Nevada's precious wildlife and environment.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Assemblywoman Gorlow, is there anything else you'd like to add before we open it up to questions?
Thank you, Chair Watts. No, we're open and available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. With that, committee, I'll open it up for questions. I believe first we had Assemblywoman Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I actually have a couple. First, Assemblywoman Gorlow, thank you for bringing the bill forward. I was working in my yard yesterday. My apricot, the foolish tree, is blooming too early in northern Nevada, but it was full of honeybees, and I was thankful that they were there. My grandfather was a bee man in Smith Valley. His two ways to make a living for his family was honey. He was a honey man in Smith Valley, and he had sheep. Many times when the crop dusters would go out and spray the alfalfa field, they would call my grandfather so he could go in and put his bees in so they wouldn't kill them. Unfortunately, many times they didn't call him, and so they would all die and he'd have to start over. So I am acutely aware of what pesticides do to the bee population. But I have a couple questions with us having said all of that. So are there any products right now that I could go to Home Depot and buy over the counter that have neonics in them?
Thank you, Assemblywoman Titus. To you through Chair Watts. Yes, there are products that are available on the shelves, although there are several products that retailers have voluntarily removed from the shelves, but you can still find them.
So
Offhand, I don't have a list though, sorry.
Follow up on that, Chair Watts. So with that,
follow up, and also Assemblywoman, you may, Gorlow, you may respond directly to the member.
Thank you, Chair.
so would this bill then allow notification that, what about all the folks who have them and not know that this is now banned? I see it doesn't start until 2022. And so those folks who maybe buy it every couple of years, they have something that they could buy. How do we get the notice out from the Department of Ag, from Home Depot, from Lowe's, whoever, that you have this product?
Thank you, Chair Titus. For the record, Assemblywoman Michelle Gorlow. That would be something that the Department of Ag would work on to notify retailers that this is a restricted product. We're not going to ask people to throw away their product. It's just they would not be able to purchase any new products after January of 2022. So any product that they have would just stay until they used it all.
And final question, something Rock on the actual bill as written on section 4, number 2, you have that the director may by regulation designate any other chemical not listed in section 1 of this act as belonging to the basically neonic class of chemicals, even if it doesn't belong there, because there's no clarification there. So I'm wondering about that open-ended language. Any class they want to designate, she'll designate, or does it have to be some science behind it?
Thank you again for the question. For the record, Assemblywoman Michelle Gorlow. That is to allow the director to put on any new neonicotinoid class product that would be developed in the future onto it. So we can clarify that language that it is specifically for a neonic product that may in the future be developed.
In the future. Thank you, because that's just so open-ended. They could just classify any chemical, even though it's not one. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the questions.
Thank you. With that, we'll go on to Assemblywoman Wheeler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Assemblywoman, I understand the intent of your bill, good intent, I think. But I was going to ask you about section 4, subsection 2, just like Assemblywoman Titus did. It's so open-ended that I see that the plain language of the bill says something that's a lot different than the intent of the bill. And I would ask that that kind of be fixed. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Assemblyman Wheeler. For the record, Assemblywoman Michelle Gorlow, and I appreciate the feedback. That will be something we will look at amending as well. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we'll go on to Assemblyman Ellison.
Thank you, Ms. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Gorlow, for bringing the bill forward. I just had a few questions. That number 2 was asked twice, but I do have something to ask about Section 7, and you've got 8 items listed on here, actually 7. Out of all of them, is any of these on the market today, or these ones are going to be limited, or can you answer that? And then I've got how many of these pesticides right now are illegal for private lands?
Thank you for the question, Assemblyman Ellison. For the record, Assemblywoman Michelle Gorlow. I will have to look for a list. I know that many of these chemicals have already been voluntarily pulled by retailers. I found the list on the internet and I tried printing it and it did not print well at all. So I will try again, maybe copy paste. If I have to type them out myself, I will get you that list so that you'll have that by the end of the week.
Mr. Ellison, you're on mute.
I'm so sorry, sir. I pushed the button twice. I was reading an article just recently about bees, and of course, to try to find out why the bees are, because we have a large garden in our area and we get 1 or 2 bees and that's it. So I looked on there and they said that they have no idea where all these bees went to because they never found storms of bodies unless, there was a farmer that dropped chemicals on there at one time, but the bees would be on the ground. But right now, the massive flow of bees that are not here, they can't prove what killed them or where they went. Can you answer that? Or maybe I'm looking at this wrong.
Can I address that?
Yes.
This is Matt Forrester. So the expectation of finding dead bodies of insects, that's a tall order and it's not really needed. This problem has been studied from sort of all different angles. We can take these animals into the lab and we can show toxicity with respect to the amounts that are put out in yards and on farms. And then we can look at spatial and temporal associations and see, for example, that in years when more pesticides are put out, the following year we have fewer bees the next year. So we don't really need to find the dead bodies, which is a tall order for something this small, but we are pretty confident that these chemicals have negative impacts in the field. They're designed to do that. It's really not shocking that they would. Another thing to keep in mind when you're trying to get to the bottom of reports like that one is that the honeybee is only one out of hundreds of bees in Nevada. And really, we need all of those bees moving forward. The managed European honeybee that we use to get honey from is fine, but it's not our most important wild bee. We need to look out for the hundreds of wild bees that live in this state as well.
Okay, thank you. And can you tell us, being that you're an expert, can you tell us about these, the pesticides that are on the market?
I am not an expert in the market availability of these things. I know I was actually just looking last night. The Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation has a lot of good resources online, and I was looking at some of their lists of available pesticides containing neonics, and there are many of them. I don't know them offhand, but we could get you those lists.
That's good enough.
Thanks.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ellison, and for the questions. Do any other members have questions? All right. Well, I have a couple. Just wanted to follow up on a couple of points. So I think one of the previous questions was about was kind of referencing colony collapse disorder, and that there are a lot of research and a lot of possible explanations for that. And so I guess this would be a follow-up to Mr. Forrester. While there's still a lot of research going on about colony collapse disorder, what you're saying is that this, not necessarily that neonicotinoid pesticides are the cause of CCD, but they are contributing to a decline in pollinator numbers. Is that a fair characterization?
That's exactly right. So I don't work on colony collapse disorder. I don't work on honeybees at all. focused on natural ecosystems and the diversity of natural pollinators, bees and bees and butterflies and bumblebees. And those animals are, incidentally impacted by our use of these pesticides. And they are really a bigger problem. The honeybee is one very particular tiny bit of managed nature. We're worried about the functioning of sort of all of natural ecosystems in the West that are endangered.
Thank you very much. And just for the clarity of the record, that was Matthew Forrester for the record. I had another follow-up question for Assemblywoman Gorlow. So it was mentioned, there were a few questions about the availability, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but this is essentially designating this as restricted use. So anybody who goes through the process to be able to use restricted use pesticides would still be able to apply neonicotinoid pesticides. Is that correct? It's just implementing a greater degree of control and training before they can be deployed.
Thank you, Chair Watts. For the record, Assemblywoman Michelle Gorlow, and that is correct. Those, such as our farmers who have had training, they know when to place them, how to place these pesticides. This is just going to continue the same as the ones that they're already restricted, making sure that they have training and again, know when and where. You don't want to be putting this chemical down, as Assemblywoman Titus had mentioned with her father, not calling. It's very breezy. That can have adverse effects. What we're trying to do is limit the use of this pesticide by people who don't really understand what this chemical can do. And so that's exactly what we're trying to do, is those that can or have a license for restricted use would continue to be able to operate with that license.
Thank you very much. And I have one last question. You mentioned that some manufacturers or retailers are pulling some of these products off of their shelves. And I believe I saw some information that the EPA is also taking additional action on this class of pesticides, requiring additional personal protective equipment, trying to keep it from being used on residential turf, providing additional language on labels, advising homeowners not to use these products in certain circumstances and other things. So I was just wondering if you have any knowledge of that, or could speak to the fact that it seems that the federal government is looking into at least putting some additional requirements on the use of these types of pesticides as well.
Thank you again for that question, Chair Watts. And for the record, Assemblywoman Michelle Gorlow. And that is correct. The EPA had several of these chemicals as restricted. It was pulled back in about 2018, and I'd have to check for sure and get you that information on which of the chemicals were on and then had been removed again. But they are looking at putting some of these back on a restricted. And as mentioned in my testimony, the European Union has restricted and eliminated a lot of the chemicals.
Thank you very much for that. Members, are there any other questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you again for the presentation. We will now move on to testimony for Assembly Bill 275. As a reminder, to provide testimony, you must register online on the legislative website, where you'll receive the information to dial in. Please remember to clearly state and spell your name and limit your testimony to 2 minutes. With that, we will start by taking testimony in support of Assembly Bill 275.
Thank you, Chair. To testify in support on AB 275, please press *9 now to enter the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits 155. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christy Cabrera, CHRISTI-CABRERA, and I'm the Policy and Advocacy Director for the Nevada Conservation League. Neonicotinoid pesticides have severe impacts on pollinators such as bees and have been linked to pollinator decline worldwide. Pollinators are critical for productive agricultural crops, and 1 in every 3 bites of food is reliant on pollinators. Neonics are absorbed into plant tissues and pollen and are later ingested by pollinators. Once infected, bees and other pollinators struggle with simple navigation and experience reduced growth rates. Recent studies have shown that neonics can reduce bee populations by 89%. Neonics are also linked to mass die-offs of native bees, birds, fish, and harm other insects and earthworms, which keep our soil healthy and nutrient dense. If left unchecked, the consequences of neonic pesticides could lead to significant disruptions in our global food supply and collapsed critical ecosystems. We strongly urge your support on this important piece of legislation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Barrera. We'll move on to the next person wishing to provide testimony and support.
Caller with the last three digits 946. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hi, my name is Madeline Reese, MadelynReese, and I'm a volunteer member of the Sierra Club's Legislative Committee. I am a member of the Sierra Club Toyabe chapter, and we represent more than 30,000 supporters in Nevada, and we are in support of AB 275. As massive numbers of bees and other pollinators keep dying across the globe, study after study continues to connect these deaths to neonicotinoid pesticides, or neonics. These chemicals are neurotoxic, causing damage to nerve cells and insects and ultimately binding to the cells and destroying them. Insects poisoned with neonics exhibit shaking, paralysis, and usually end up dying. Not only are these pesticides linked to massive bee die-offs, their use has been shown to cause significant losses of aquatic invertebrates, a critical food source to birds and fish. Neonics use has also been linked with documented losses of bird and butterfly populations. These pesticides, neonics, can also persist in soil, water, and plants long after the pesticide is administered, meaning their harmful effects can continue unchecked. We are in support of defining any neonic pesticide as a restricted use pesticide with the state's Department of Agriculture and limiting its use in general and prohibiting its use on state lands. This is a critical and crucial way to begin protecting biodiversity, and the health of our local ecosystems. We've seen other countries across the world, including members of the European Union as well as Canada, begin to ban several types of neonics. And I would love, and all of my fellow members would love, to have Nevada be the next to start restricting the use of these harmful chemicals. We at the Sierra Club believe that this bill is in the best interest of all living things in Nevada, and we would love you to help us. Please help protect our pollinators. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your testimony. We'll move on to the next caller in support.
Caller with the last three digits 605. Please press *6 to unmute. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last three digits 605. Please press *6 to unmute, and you may begin. Caller with the last three digits 399. Please press *6 to unmute. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin. For those callers that are joining us recently, we are on support for AB 275. Please press *9 now to enter the queue. Caller with the last three digits 120. Please press *6 to unmute. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin. Please slowly state.
Lisa Ortega, Lisaortega. Thank you, Chair and Natural Resource Committee, for your work and for taking my testimony today. My name is Lisa Ortega. I'm a master arborist and current state certified applicator. Our city trees have become ravaged by bark beetles infesting in our neighborhoods, in our community, especially in Las Vegas, especially in light of the urban heat island. These come literally from the world. I appreciate putting these neonics on the restricted use of pesticide list. Please know that this does not restrict their use, but restricts the type of person who can buy them. I have also found that homeowners buy whatever they want online, restricted or not. And this bill won't curtail that as written. Thank you, and thank you for considering putting them on the restricted use list.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Mr. Ortega, we'll go on to the next caller in support.
Caller with the last three digits, 605. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hello, my name is James Russell, James, last name Russell. I'm the president of Northern Nevada Beekeeping Association, and I'm going to kind of state some of the obvious that has already been brought up. Neonics are derived from nicotine. We all know what that does to smokers. With insects, it affects the nervous system. It affects their navigation and orientation. Once they're exposed to it, they can't return to the hive, and they just die out in flight somewhere. And the neonics are systemic. They're taken up by the plants, work their way up to the plant, finally to flowers and nectar. An example of that is the imidacloprid that was applied to linden trees outside of Portland quite a few years ago. It was sprayed on the trees on March 2nd. They started discovering dead bumblebees July 1st, and they just estimated somewhere between 25 and 50,000 dead bumblebees throughout this parking lot. The Department of Ag there in Oregon came out and tested the tree foliage August 12th and found the insecticide. So neonics, they stay in the system for a long time. So as was mentioned earlier, honeybees are not the only thing. There's probably over 1,000 native pollinators in Nevada. Many butterflies and moths are pollinators. National Geographic just came out a little while ago. It was even on PBS that the monarch butterfly has declined 80% in the past 20 years. You know, a lot of that is due to cropland, but it's also due to pesticides. One thing I do want to point out is I agree that we can keep this available to registered applicators. They have an economic incentive not to apply too much. You know, where they're putting it on acres and they have to pay for every single bit that goes out.
Mr. Russell, if you could begin to wrap up your remarks, please.
Okay. All right. So it's the homeowner that I'm most worried about. So thank you for considering this. Bye.
Thank you very much for your testimony. If you have additional remarks, feel free to provide those in writing to our committee secretary and manager. With that, we'll go on to the next caller in support.
Caller with the last three digits, 399. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you. My name is Cameron Dyer, Camerondyer. I'm a Reno resident, a beekeeper, and a member of the Northern Nevada Beekeeping Association. As discussed, pollinators are an integral part of our environment that support backyard gardens, farms, orchards, and flowers, indigenous and non-natives. Honeybees are just one part of that complex web. As a beekeeper, I've taken the time and effort to research pesticides that either do not affect pollinators, or if I do need to use a pesticide that can harm local pollinators, I try and apply them after the sun goes down, when pollinators are no longer foraging, and the impact of beneficial species is minimal. I'd like to thank Assemblywoman Gorlow for bringing this bill forward and setting Nevada up to be a leader on protecting some of our most important fauna. The two components of this bill that I think go allow for incorporating specifically include the previously discussed exemptions for specific uses of the substance and the continued allowed use of the sprays by licensed professionals such as farmers who understand the value that pollinators bring to their crops and will, similar to myself and likely better, apply pesticides containing neonics in the least harmful manner when possible. I support this bill and ask that you vote in favor of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go on to the next report.
The callers that have joined recently, we are on support for AB 275. Please press *9 now to enter the queue. Chair, it seems there are no more callers in support at this time.
Thank you. With that, we'll move to testimony in opposition on Assembly Bill 275.
To testify in opposition on AB 275, please press *9 now to enter the queue. Caller with the last three digits 349, please press *6 to unmute. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
For the record, my name is Doug Busselman. I'm the Executive Vice President of Nevada Farm Bureau. We are testifying today in opposition to AB 275. Farm Bureau's policy position supports the continued use of the neonicotinoid pesticide group for agricultural and horticultural crops. We understand that AB 275 will not prohibit the use of neonicotinoid products, but does direct the Nevada Department of Agriculture to classify neonicotinoids as restricted use pesticides. Based on our research, there is no evidence of any negative impacts in Nevada caused by the limited use of neonicotinoid products. We believe that the Nevada Department of Agriculture has the responsibility of oversight with the authority and also the process for taking action to protect people and the environment when there is a necessity to designate products as restricted use. The federal EPA also has the ability to designate restricted uses. It seems that having the legislature dictate what products should be designated as restricted use sets a troubling precedent. Neonicotinoids are very effective insecticide technology and are among the safest pesticides for people, animals, and the environment. If the Nevada Department of Agriculture were to have a basis for making a restricted use pesticide for any pesticide product, the normal process should be used for making this type of change without legislative directives. Thank you for your consideration of our views of AB 275. We encourage the committee to not move this forward. Thank you.
Mr. Busselman, we'll move on to the next caller in opposition.
Chair, there are no more callers in opposition at this time.
Thank you. With that, we'll move to testimony in the neutral position on Assembly Bill 275.
To testify in neutral on AB 275, please press *9 now to enter the queue. Caller with the last three digits 774, please press *6 to unmute. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
For the record, Ashley Jepson, that's ASHLEY, Jepson, JEPPSON. For the record, Ashley Jepson with the Nevada Department of Agriculture. We wanted to take this opportunity to thank Assemblywoman Gorlow for reaching out to the department on this bill and for being cognizant of and trying to not create any impacts to industry. We also wanted to take this as an opportunity to just clarify that there are no fiscal notes to this bill, and again, just extend our appreciation to Assemblywoman Gorlow for coordination. Thank you.
Thank you for the testimony, Ms. Jepson. Are there any questions for the Department of Agriculture? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next caller in neutral.
Chair, it seems there are no more callers in neutral at this time.
Thank you very much. With that, we'll close testimony, and I'll turn the floor back over to Assemblywoman Gorlow for any closing remarks that she'd like to make.
Thank you, Chair Watson. Thank you, committee. I do want to just remind you that you all should have received a handout regarding this bill as well. I look forward to working with everyone, cleaning up some of the language, continuing the conversations. And I'd also like to take a moment and thank Mr. Forrester and Ms. Libby for testifying today. And thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you. With that, I will close the hearing on Assembly Bill 275. And as I will be presenting the next bill, I'm going to turn the gavel over to our vice chair to run the meeting from here.
Thank you, Chair. I will now open the hearing on Assembly Bill 97, which revises provisions governing toxic chemicals. Please go ahead when you're ready, Chair.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice Chair and members of the committee. For the record, I am Howard Watts, representing Assembly District 15 in Clark County, and I am glad to present Assembly Bill 97 for your consideration today, which addresses certain toxic chemicals that particularly impact our firefighters. First, let's talk about Pfas, and there's going to be a few acronyms during this presentation. That is short for per and polyfluorinated alkyl substances. These chemicals are used to make products grease-proof or waterproof and are used in a variety of things from cookware, food packaging, apparel, carpets, and firefighting foams. Unfortunately, several of these compounds have also been linked to serious health problems, including cancer, hormone disruption, and immune suppression. They are sometimes called forever chemicals because they do not easily break down in the environment over time. PFAS contamination has become a major issue, particularly near manufacturing facilities that are using these chemicals, as well as at airports and military bases, where it's been used both in actual firefighting as well as in training and testing. Firefighters face high levels of potential exposure during training, testing, firefighting, and the presence of these compounds within their turnout gear itself. Here in Nevada, a 2000 to 2015 NDEP and EPA study, that's the Nevada Division of Environmental Protection and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, they studied 98 sites within 18 public water systems for our state, including those serving the Las Vegas and Reno metro areas. That study found levels below the current health advisory levels set by the EPA across the board, which is very good news. We also don't have any industrial sources of this pollution in our state, which is what has led to a lot of contamination, particularly of water supplies in other areas. The story is different at our military installations, however. Of 11 samples at Nellis Air Force Base, 8 were above the advisory level of 70 nanograms per liter, with the highest at 42,000 nanograms per liter. That is 600 times above what is considered safe. At Creech, 4 of the 8 samples were above the advisory level, with the highest at 21,000 nanograms per liter. And at the Reno Air National Guard facility at the Reno Tahoe International Airport, all 11 samples were above safe levels, with the highest concentration at 110,000 nanograms per liter. That is more than 1,500 times what is currently considered to be a safe level. Thankfully, there's been additional action on this, not only in other states, but also in the federal government. Earlier this year, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency announced that they are developing drinking water standards for the 2 most common PFAS chemicals, PFOS and PFOA. Additionally, Nevada's Division of Environmental Protection secured a grant to develop a PFAS action plan. They're also actively working to address the contamination at our DoD sites, and they have the authority to address contaminants of concern that are at high levels even before official drinking water standards have been set. As I learned about these developments, that led to a proposed amendment for the bill. And I'll walk you through it and the conceptual amendment now. My proposed amendment eliminates sections 1 through 5 of the bill, which would have called for the state to independently set drinking surface water and effluent standards, as well as section 11, which would have required permitting for facilities and the development of capture and disposal standards. Instead, I'm proposing the creation of a work group to assist NDEP in the development and execution of their PFAS action plan. Utah's Department of Environmental Quality has established a similar work group, and I think this will really help flesh it out and develop a state-specific strategy to tackle this issue. Section 12 of the bill prohibits the use of firefighting foam with PFAS chemicals from being used in training to minimize firefighter exposure. Sections 13 and 14 sought to phase out the use of these foams entirely, but we're currently looking at the alternatives that are available that can effectively deal with these sorts of high temperature fuel fires. So the conceptual amendment removes those provisions and instead calls for any discharge of firefighting foams with these chemicals to be reported to NDEP, ensuring that they have the information needed to keep our water systems and us safe. AB 97 also deals with certain fire retardant chemicals called organohalogens. While these substances increase the time for ignition and combustion and provide a critical life-saving window when fires break out, they add to the toxins in the smoke that firefighters and others are exposed to and could leach out of some consumer products on their own, putting our families at risk day to day. Sections 16 through 26 of the bill ensure that children's products, upholstered furniture, textiles, and mattresses that are manufactured or sold in this state in the future are free from high concentrations of these chemicals. There's a small technical change to section 25 in my proposed amendment, focusing the standards on state, local, and federal standards that are set for these chemicals. In closing, I'd just add that cancer is the leading cause of death for our firefighters, and that is in large, if not in complete part, due to the toxic chemicals that they're exposed to on the job. With the conceptual amendment, AB 97 certainly balances the overall safety of the community with reducing the hazards that our first responders face. At the same time, the bill looks to protect all of us from the potential impacts that these chemicals can have. I ask for your support, and with that, I'll stand for any questions that members of the committee may have.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question from Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you, Vice Chair Cohen, and thank you, Chair Watts, for bringing forward AB 97. When I'm looking at the conceptual amendments, in particular on section 11, with the standards at development at the national level, if this legislation were to go through effectively, would that mean that we would have to re-examine the language, or does this also include the possible language that is being considered at the federal level? And then secondary question, would that national standard, would that satisfy or address the issue that you brought up of the federal buildings that are such a higher, I believe they're federal buildings, that are such a higher level than the other areas?
Thank you very much for the questions, Assemblywoman Anderson. Howard Watts for the record. I'll answer your questions in reverse order. So speaking of the federal and particularly the military DoD installations where this is the concentrations are a major issue, the Department of Defense is moving towards trying to remove the use of these compounds by the year 2024. Again, there's a lot of work to figure out what suitable alternatives can be deployed and how that phasing out works. But that's something that the military is looking to do to make sure that the problem doesn't get any worse. And then NDEP and EPA will be working with those installations to further evaluate the extent of contamination and figure out any cleanup, appropriate cleanup plans for the contamination that already exists. So that will happen regardless of the outcome of AB 97. What I would say is that the federal government is particularly working on drinking water standards, which was something I proposed, I believe, in Section 2 of the original bill. All of those statewide standard settings are being removed. So once the federal government sets drinking water standards, those will apply here in Nevada as well. You'll see, if you look in the fiscal notes, the amount of work that would be involved for the state to undertake all of the research required to set standards independent of the federal government. And that's something that I might be willing to support if I didn't know that the federal government's already underway taking some of these steps themselves. So that's the effect of that. So really one of the core provisions, and I kind of glossed over in my presentation, is prohibiting the use of firefighting foams that contain these chemicals for use in training purposes, again, to minimize exposure for firefighters, as well as under the proposed amendment to limit the circumstances in which they could be tested, again, to minimize the exposure risk for folks. And then the other component is making sure that any discharges are reported to the Division of Environmental Protection so they know when potential additional contamination may be occurring.
Thank you. A follow-up, Chair, or Vice Chair Cohen?
Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. That totally makes sense, what all you're saying. My other question has to do with Section 3, the proposed new language of Section 3, subsection 4. And I'm not even going to try to explain what the scientific language would be. Is that water quality criteria, is that going to be consideration also at the federal level, or is that based upon other elements that the commission will need to consider?
Thank you for that question, Assemblywoman Anderson. Howard Watts for the record. Again, what we found is that drinking water is one of the most important standards, because that's the water that we're taking in. So any source of supply for our drinking water needs to meet high standards of quality. And I should note that at least Southern Nevada Water Authority actually regularly tests its supply to detect, and the levels are hard to detect because they're so low, which is a good thing. And again, the NDEP EPA study found levels well below health advisory levels. So really that's where we're focusing. And so once we have those standards in place, if we wanted to at some point look at effluent or surface water standards, we could, but the main action that EPA is taking is on drinking water standards. And once they adopt those will apply in the state of Nevada.
Thank you for the clarification. Thank you, Vice Chair, for the opportunity to ask the question.
Thank you. And I'm not seeing any other questions, so let me know if I'm missing anyone. So I have a couple of questions in section, I know this is a deleted section, but 5.3a, there's mention of being protective of public health, including without limitation, the health of vulnerable subpopulations such as pregnant women, nursing mothers, infants, and children. So we've been kind of focusing on the firefighters, but do we know anything about birth defects? And I'm not even going to try to pronounce the names of these chemicals. Or is it just we have to be very careful when children are involved?
Thank you very much for that question, Vice Chair Cohen. Howard Watts for the record. Yes, I should have spoken a little bit about how particularly sensitive children are as well. Under the provisions of the bill that are still largely intact dealing with the fire retardant chemicals, you'll see that we also specifically tackle children's products over concerns that they can leach out or gas out of the product. and cause contamination that way. So for chemical or components that contain PFAS, those are a concern to children for their hormone disruption and carcinogenic properties as well. What I'd say is that the work group that is being proposed under the Conceptual Amendment would take a holistic look at PFAS contamination and assist the division in the development of that action plan, and could lead to additional policy consideration by this body in the future to make sure that we're reducing the exposure to vulnerable populations. But honestly, it's an issue if for anyone who's exposed to it. But yes, firefighters, I think, face the highest risk by far. Children also face greater consequences if exposed to high levels of this pollution.
Thank you for that. And then, sorry, just a second. I do have a question about the 2/3. So is that's now gone because of the amendment?
Thank you for the question, Vice Chair. Howard Watts for the record. I believe that we do have the Division of Environmental Protection who will speak in neutral about the bill, and particularly the fiscal note that they've submitted and how the conceptual amendment would impact that. My understanding is that the amendment would remove the 2/3 requirement. I believe it was section 11. I don't have the bill language in front of me right now. There is a section that you'll find that references a permitting process and the payment of fees. And that was for any facility with these substances to be permitted and for their management of the capture and discharge of them to be regulated. So with the removal of that section, I believe the fiscal note or the 2/3 requirement on the bill would be eliminated.
Thank you for that. And I think our legal counsel has some clarification.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I just wanted to clarify that it's section 11, subsection 2, paragraph B. The reason there was a 2/3 originally was because the State Environmental Commission was required to adopt regulations establishing requirements for obtaining a certificate of registration for a person who uses these items. And those requirements would include, without limitation, the establishment of a fee. And it looks in the proposed amendment that that requirement to establish a fee is being removed.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions, committee? Okay, seeing none. Chair, do you have other presenters?
I do not. We'll keep things moving. So with that, if it's all right with you, Madam Vice Chair, we can move on to testimony.
Yes, let's move on to testimony in support, please.
To testify in support on AB 97, please press *9 now to enter the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits 689, please press *6 to unmute. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, Tom, T-O-M, last name Dunn, D-U-N-N, District Vice President of the Professional Firefighters of Nevada. And we are here today in support of AB 97 and the conceptual amendment to AB 97. PFAS chemicals have been identified as harmful substances after decades of use in thousands of everyday items. The Environmental Protection Agency has declared PFAS to be a toxic substance, determining there is no safe level of PFAS within the human body. Toxic PFAS enters the body through inhalation, absorption, and ingestion, and remains in the body for 2 to 9 years following exposure. PFAS is linked to a growing list of health concerns, including thyroid, bladder, kidney, and liver cancers, diabetes, and elevated cholesterol. Firefighters have experienced long-term occupational exposure to PFAS due to the use of aqueous firefighting foam, a fire suppressant agent in firefighting and training exercises. PFAS has also been used in personal protective equipment to make gear water resistant and protect firefighters from steam burns. To date, there's been limited research on the impact of personal protective equipment containing PFAS on firefighters' health. And recently there was federal legislation called the Guaranteed Equipment Safety for Firefighters Act, which would help advance research into this important health and safety issue. Just this year, the International Association of Firefighters passed a resolution to call on the federal government to continue to study the impacts of PFAS exposure on firefighters and work with manufacturers to immediately cease the use of PPE containing PFAS. On a public health level, PFASs are included on a number of products to include wall coatings, any type of water-resistant coating that's basically on your furniture and your carpet, and everyday citizens are exposed to these chemicals as well. We'd like to thank Assemblyman Watts for bringing this legislation forward. And as another background, several states recently within the last couple of years, to include California, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, Kentucky, Georgia, and Pennsylvania, have passed similar legislation as well. And with that, I'll be able to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Committee, do we have any questions for Mr. Dunn? Okay, seeing none, thank you, Mr. Dunn. I'm not going to do that for everyone, but you do, for everyone in support or opposition, but you do have unique knowledge on this subject. So thank you for that. And with that, we'll move on to the next person in support.
Caller with the last three digits, 455. Please press *6 to unmute. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes. You may begin.
For the record, I am Daniel Fisher, Daniel Fischer. I'm the Deputy General Manager of the Clark County Water Reclamation District. Chair Watts, Vice Chair Cohen, and Natural Resources Committee members, thank you for the opportunity to speak on AB 97. The Clark County Water Reclamation District collects and treats 100 million gallons of wastewater per day and returns most of the resulting reclaimed water to Lake Mead by way of the Las Vegas Wash. In doing so, we prevent 300 tons of pollutants from reaching the environment each day. Our Flamingo Water Resource Center is the largest such facility on the Colorado River. In collaboration with the three other major wastewater treatment agencies in Southern Nevada, we wrote a letter to Chair Watts expressing concerns with Section 3 and 4 of AB 97. Chair Watts responded with a proposed conceptual amendment, which has been discussed here today, which fully addresses our issues. We support a work group to look at the extent of the PFAS problem in Nevada and focusing on source control for PFAS. Therefore, the position of the district on AB 97 is now support. Chair Watts, we're thankful for your listening to our concerns and making improvements to AB 97 and for your efforts for clean water in Nevada. Thank you all for your time and your service to Nevada on the Assembly Natural Resources Committee. You are all welcome to come visit our facilities anytime.
Thank you. With that, we'll move on to the next person in support, please.
Caller with the last three digits, 662. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
My name is Toby Tyler, Tobityler. On behalf of the Sierra Club and the Toyabe Chapter's more than 40,000 members and supporters statewide, I'm speaking in support of AB 97. As a retired environmental engineer, I can attest to the difficulties these chemicals pose in our environment and drinking and wastewater. PFAS do not break down naturally in the environment, can move through the soils, contaminating drinking water sources, and they build up, bioaccumulate in fish and wildlife. As Chairman Watts stated, they are therefore called forever chemicals. These chemicals are linked to cancer and developmental and reproductive harm and have contaminated drinking water sources across the country with increasing regularity. Setting limits for these man-made chemicals is essential to ensure the water we drink and the water in our environment is safe for all living organisms. Due to the lack of federal direction and regulation on these chemicals until very recently, several states have issued enforceable maximum contaminant levels, while other states have established non-enforceable health advisory levels. This bill is a first step toward diminishing the input of these forever chemicals in the environment by working toward establishing effluent limits or at least state-specific strategy as stated by Chair Watts. To limit harm to our environment and health, we must also stop all non-essential uses of PFAS and move to safer non-fluorine alternatives wherever possible. For example, PFAS in carpets and firefighting foams are not necessary. This is a very timely and important bill that the Sierra Club supports because it is imperative that these harmful chemicals be kept out of the environment. The public should be confident that their water is safe to drink and wastewater discharges will not contaminate groundwater, downstream water supplies, or the environment as a whole. We strongly urge you to pass AB 97. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Next person in support, please.
Caller with the last three digits 155. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christy Cabrera, CHRASTI, and I'm the Policy and Advocacy Director for the Nevada Conservation League. PFAS are toxic chemicals that can contaminate water, harm the environment, and are linked to numerous health impacts, even in very low quantities. PFAS do not break down in the natural environment and can find their way into our soil and drinking water. They can also accumulate and remain in the environment, wildlife, or our bodies for extended periods of time. Because of this, they're commonly referred to as forever chemicals. Studies have shown that exposure to these chemicals can cause adverse health effects, including increased risk of cancer, suppressed immune systems, increased cholesterol, and problems in fetal development. This bill is a step in the right direction to keep Nevadans and our environment safe from these harmful chemicals. We'd like to thank Assemblyman Watts for bringing this important legislation forward, and we urge your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person in support, please.
For the callers that have joined recently, we are on support for AB 97. Please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Vice Chair, there are no more callers in support at this time.
Yeah, thank you. So we will move on to opposition.
To testify in opposition on AB 97, please press star 9 now to enter the queue. Vice Chair, there are no callers in opposition at this time.
Thank you. And with that, we will move on to neutral, please.
To testify in neutral on AB 97, please press star 9 now to enter the queue. Caller with the last three digits 948, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Vice Chair Cohen and members of the committee, thank you. For the record, David Cherry, spelled DAVIDCHERRY, and I'm Government Affairs Manager for the City of Henderson. While the City of Henderson was originally in opposition to the bill as written, we thank the Chair for bringing the amendment in response to the concerns identified by the Coalition of Water Reclamation Stakeholders, of which the City of Henderson was a participant. And with the adoption of the amendment, this will allow the city to move to the neutral position on AB 97. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on the phone for neutral?
Caller with the last three digits 713. Please press star 6 to unmute. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last three digits 713. You are unmuted and may begin. Caller with the last three digits 889. Please press star 6 to unmute. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Cohen and members of the committee. My name is Leo Drozdoff, Leodrozdoff. with the Perkins Company. I'm here representing the Truckee Meadows Water Authority, often referred to as TUMWA. We are here before you today in neutral based on language in the original bill that will be removed by the Conceptual Amendment. We wish to thank Chair Watts, who worked with us early and often in the session and accepted some of our suggestions that we brought to his attention. TUMWA does indeed like the Conceptual Amendment and will work to get to a position of support before this bill is brought to work session. I did also want to point out, similar to SNWA, TUMWA has tested for Pfas and PFOA, and those results were also non-detect. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you. Next person on the phone in neutral, please.
Caller with the last three digits 814. Please press *6 to unmute. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Cohen and members of the committee. Edith Duarte, EDITH DUARTE, with Strategies 360, representing Western States Petroleum Association, testifying today in neutral to AB 97. I would also like to thank the chairman for working with us on the conceptual amendment, especially sections 11 through 14. PFAS firefighting foam is used to quickly and efficiently suppress vapor and extinguish petroleum and chemical fires. The conceptual amendment does acknowledge that there currently is no other product on the market that performs as well. And until we do, PFAS-containing firefighting foams must be used to save human life in critical infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person in neutral, please.
Caller with the last three digits 738. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon. My name is Nikki Bailey Lundahl, NIKKI BAILEY Lundahl LUNDAHL. I'm here today representing the Nevada Mining Association. While we work towards finding other firefighting solutions on our mine sites, I want to thank the bill sponsor for working with us and other stakeholders on the bill. With the proposed amendment, the Nevada Mining Association is in neutral. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person in neutral, please.
Caller with the last three digits 713. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, Tim Shestek, TIMSHESTEK, with the American Chemistry Council. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on AB 97. This legislation touches on several different chemistries used by a variety of different industry sectors and in a multitude of different products. ATC member companies manufacture many of the chemistries included in AB 97. The bill, as introduced, did present a few concerns, including a prohibition on the use of certain firefighting foams that are important for extinguishing flammable liquid fires. I want to thank Assemblymember Watts for the ongoing discussion we've had over the past several weeks. The conceptual amendment that has been described establishes a practical process for addressing PFAS-related water quality issues and appropriately prohibits training and testing of any PFAS-containing firefighting foam. I just want to make one comment about reinforcing the distinction between the firefighting foams intended for deployment on high hazard fires and the flame retardant chemicals used in specific products to help ensure the fire safety of those products. They're very different issues, very different use profiles, and should not be intertwined in the discussion. The proposed amendments do recognize both the fire safety benefits of flame retardant chemistries that are used in electronics and electrical components, and industry innovations to develop more sustainable fire safety chemistries. Again, I want to thank Assemblymember Watts for the ongoing dialogue and openness to working with us on these issues. And based on the conceptual draft, it would be our intent to remove opposition of the bill. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you. Next person in neutral on the phone, please.
Vice Chair, there are no more callers in neutral at this time.
Okay, and I understand we do have a neutral testimony on the Zoom. Mr. Lovato, please go ahead.
Thank you, Vice Chair Cohen, members of the committee. Greg Lovato, Administrator of the Nevada Division of Environmental Protection, testifying neutral on AB 97. We support efforts to protect Nevada's water resources from PFAS contamination, and I thank Assemblyman Watts for receiving input from us in the March 22 Conceptual Amendment. The amendment would support PFAS workgroup activities NDEP was already planning and removes our fiscal note. Although PFAS substances have been in widespread use since the 1950s, testing that Assemblyman Watts mentioned, conducted in 2013, 2015, did not detect PFAS in Nevada drinking water supplies. Many other states have had much more severe impacts to public water supplies in that initial testing, but we recognize that initial testing was limited. It was only a snapshot in time. It only tested for 7 of nearly 30 PFAS substances for which commercial lab capability now exists. Also, the prior testing only targeted Nevada public water systems serving populations over 10,000, with 4 additional smaller systems randomly selected. It's worth noting that additional testing under that federal program is being planned for 2023 to 2025, and that 29 PFAS compounds will be tested. Although it has not been detected in Nevada's public water systems, we will pursue additional federal funding to assess the potential threat to our water resources while we develop communication and contingency plans in the event of an occurrence. It's important to note that although the amendment removes the requirement for NDEP to set drinking water and other water quality standards, NDEP does have existing authority under Nevada Water Pollution Control and Public Water Systems Law in NRS 445A to address occurrences of PFAS. And we have previously addressed contaminants that do not have federal or state enforceable primary drinking water standards. Historic examples include releases of perchlorate at the former Pepcon and Kerr-McGee Tronox facilities near Henderson, as well as releases of fuel oxygenates from gas stations and sulfates from mine sites. We would use these same authorities to respond to any instances of PFAS contamination. NDEP staff currently participate on an interstate PFAS work group coordinated by the EPA Office of Research and Development Liaison to the Pacific Southwest region. NDEP will be tasking professional staff from both our Bureaus of Safe Drinking Water and Corrective Actions to coordinate the Nevada work group required in the Conceptual Amendment. We anticipate that the PFAS work group activities, including recommendations related to any additional steps, including sampling, could be completed in summer of 2022. That concludes my testimony, and I'm available along with NDEP Deputy Administrator Jennifer Carr to answer any questions from the committee.
Thank you. I don't see any questions. Don't see any questions. Is there anyone else on the Zoom to testify? I don't think so. Okay, seeing none. Chair, if you'd like to make a closing statement.
Thank you, Vice Chair Cohen, members of the committee. Actually, I think that I've covered everything, so I'll waive my closing. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. And with that, I will close the hearing on Assembly Bill 97 and turn the back over to the chair.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the last item on our agenda today, which is public comment. As a reminder, to provide public comment, you must register in advance to receive the information to dial in. We ask that anybody wishing to provide public comment limit their remarks to 2 minutes. Please clearly state and spell your name at the beginning. And with that, we'll turn it over to Broadcast Production Services one more time to see if we have anybody in the queue for public comment.
Thank you, Chair. To take your place in the public comment queue, please press *9 now. Chair, the public line is open and working, but there are no callers at this time.
Thank you very much. As usual, thanks to our Broadcast Production Services for helping allow members of the public and other stakeholders to participate in our meetings. Thank you, members, for your time and attention today. And thank you to everyone who did participate in today's meeting. Our next meeting will be on Wednesday, the 31st, the last day of March, at 4:00 p.m. And with that, this meeting is adjourned.